actually a common Hebrew Israelite apologetic to say the first black church in America. This is the way they phrase it. I'm not saying it's accurate because it's not the first, but it's the longest standing. Anyways, they say the first black church in America had Hebrew writing on the pews, and that's proof that our people were originally the Israelites. Have you ever heard this?
The only way that they can say that is by essentially being ignorant of history.
Dang, Isaiah.
And so when I see a Hebrew Israelite, right, go to the oldest existing black church in the nation and make assertions.
No, hold on. Can you say what you're talking about, though? What's the name? Well, just what's the name of the church you're talking about? Where is it?
First African Baptist in Savannah. Okay, they knew that they were African. If they thought that they were Hebrew, they would have never embraced an African identity. First African Baptist in Savannah, right? And the assertion is made that there are Hebrew characters on the pews. Now, it's fine if you want to believe that. There's no historical evidence for that, and nobody that speaks Hebrew has ever been able to interpret the writing. So if you want to believe that, that's fine. Just know that you're believing it by faith and not by evidence, right? That's fine if you want to believe that. But don't throw the church under the bus and claim that they're sellouts or they're somehow trying to subvert information.
You know, I myself am not any sort of like expert in any subject. I myself am an amateur, so it's not my place to try to exclude anyone else. But I do feel that irrespective of a person's status, it's better to focus on the argument and not on the person.
Wait, that don't sound right. Just wait 1 second. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. That don't sound right.
And so when I see a Hebrew Israelite, right, go to the oldest existing black church in the nation and make assertions. This gentleman right here. Huh? What happened? No, this gentleman right here with the camera in his hand. Wave your hand. Pastor
James Wesley Carr.
Yeah, James Wesley Carr. No. What's your name?
Oh, Kelly Richardson.
Kelly Richardson.
Pastor Kelly Richardson.
He is a great-great-grand-nephew?
Yeah.
Nephew of one of our first pastors. Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's his uncle right here in the corner of the actual stained glass window here to your left.
He got the eyes.
He looked just like him. Got the same eyes. Anyway, come on, guys. Come on.
When I hear someone speak from the urban apologetic community, starting with Bishop Eric Mason, Damon Richardson, John Mark Reiser, aka Vocab Malone, Pastor Isaiah Robertson, and others from that community, I cannot help but to think about how my grandmother would respond to these guys. See, when I was young, my grandmother always said, "No one will ever know how dumb you are until you open up your mouth." See, initially, I was going to fill this docu-response with clips of the urban apologetic community and simply pick apart every last one of their overreaching talking points. However, as a teacher, as a pastor, I have to use this opportunity as a teachable moment to all that have an ear and, more importantly, are willing to listen with intelligence. So let's cut to the chase. Let's deal with this crafty counsel. Let's deal with the comments made by Pastor Isaiah Robertson, which was directed at me.
And so when I see a Hebrew Israelite, right, go to the oldest existing black church in the nation and make assertions. And so when I see a Hebrew Israelite, right, go to the oldest existing black church in the nation and make assertions.
Hold on. Can you say what you're talking about, though? What's the name? Well, just what's the name of the church you're talking about, and where is it?
First African Baptist in Savannah. Okay, they knew that they were African. If they thought that they were Hebrew, they would have never embraced an African identity.
Most Egyptologists and anthropologists, archaeologists of the Eurocentric persuasion will say that Egypt is in Africa. They had to concede that, but then they still draw the line by saying that they weren't Africans like that. In other words, they weren't dark-skinned people. And of course, this is all part of the Great Deception. And the reality is that if they give up Egypt, ancient Kemet, if they give that up and say that that was a part of Black Africa, then they will also have to give up Israel. And that's why they draw the line at Egypt, because if they give up Egypt, they've got to give up Israel.
Now, we're going to go over here, and I'm going to show you where Israel sits on the African tectonic plate, which means that Israel is northeast Africa. Now, when we look at this map, this is the Sinai, okay? This is the Red Sea. This is Egypt. This is the Sinai. This is Israel. All right, this is Saudi Arabia over here. Now, if you see this in Hebrew, it says Haluach Afrikani, the African plate. Here it is right here. Israel is sitting right here. Israel is sitting on the Haluach Afrikani, which means that Israel is northeast Africa.
Without question, we are in Northeast Africa. We are landlocked to Egypt, with the exception of the Suez Canal, which was a man-made ditch, a boundary now between, in fact, it's not even really a boundary anymore since Egypt has reclaimed the Sinai Peninsula. But nevertheless, even those of us who are Pan-Africanists in our thinking and Afrocentric, we forget and we leave off that portion of Northeast Africa and don't want to claim anything beyond that.
Europeans classified this area as a Middle East, you know, and then since this the Middle East, the other question, where the Middle West, where the Middle North, and where the Middle South? They don't have no geographical terms like that. And the only reason why they use that term, Middle East, because it disconnects the proper connotation that should go with describing this land geographically.
First African Baptist in Savannah, right? And the assertion is made that there are Hebrew characters.
This is First African Baptist Church, the oldest Black church in North America. The building built by slaves. The gentleman that laid the first brick laid the last. The balcony hold pews that actually were built by slaves. They have the oldest information in this building. That information is written in cursive Hebrew writing.
On the pews. Now, it's fine if you want to believe that. There's no historical evidence for that, and nobody that speaks Hebrew has ever been able to interpret the writing. So if you want to believe that, that's fine. Just know that you're believing it by faith and not by evidence, right? That's fine if you want to believe that, but don't throw the church under the bus and claim that they're sellouts or they're somehow trying to subvert information, because that's not the case. I know people that attend that church. I know the former youth pastor of that church. His name is Pastor Paul Little. These are people that love God, and most importantly, they love Black folks.
This gentleman right here. Huh? What happened? No, this the gentleman right here with the camera in his hand. Wave your hand. Pastor.
James Wesley Carr.
Yeah, James Wesley Carr. No. What's your name?
Oh, Kelly Richardson.
Kelly Richardson.
Pastor Kelly Richardson.
He is a great grand nephew?
Yeah.
Nephew of one of our first pastors. Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's his uncle right here in the corner of the Access St. Glass window here to your left.
He got the eyes.
He looked just like him. Got the same eyes. Anyway, come on, guys. Come on.
They've done far more for Black folks. That church has done far more for Black folks than a lot of Israelite congregations. So believe what you want to believe, but when honestly, when you're shading that church and the Black church, you're shading your own history.
Listen to the tone and how he uses the phrase a Hebrew Israelite. Based off of his comments, it's quite apparent that Pastor Robertson have no clue about what it means to be African. His comments also suggest that we are not of the same people. Africa is a continent that consists of over 70 nations. When you include what's now known as the Middle East, see, that territory was known as Northeast Africa prior to the 20th century. This means that Israel is part of the continent of Africa. Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, Islam. This crafty counsel has done so much to warp our understanding of who we are and what it means to be a community. See, Pastor Robertson, led by Bishop Eric Mason, Damon Richardson, would rather stand side by side with a racist and attack their own brothers and sisters with slander.
Brother, thank you for doing this. This was crazy. So we had to get the guy that does this every day of his life to kind of help us to get this thing started. Vocab, from your experience, what is it?
Well, just call him an Edomite. A cracker. Oh, he's black. Call him a coon. Call him a coon. Works every time. Call him a coon. Yes. Private eye for Yahweh Shai at your service. Shalom, Holmes.
Read Leviticus 11:4. The cowl, because he cheweth the cud, but divideth not the hoof, he is unclean to you.
Like I always say. Vocab Malone, and I am with my man today, Jay the producer. Oh, I got another idea. Brother Jay, have you ever sang parodies before? You know, a parody, like a satire song?
Have I ever sung one?
Yeah, a parody.
No, I've never sung a parody, man.
I'm not gonna put you on the spot right now, but check it out. I wrote a parody to something, bro. I think that this thing's hilarious. I'm gonna see if you're down to do it, and I'm gonna make a video out of this joint. You know that song by Miley Cyrus, Party in the USA?
Yeah.
Yo, slavery in the USA, bro.
Oh man.
I got a whole song, man, and I can't sing it.
About that one all
right.
Let's deal with this spirit of cognitive dissonance. That's what it's called. This is coming from an article titled, "What is Cognitive Dissonance?" by Psychology Today. It says, if you ever told a lie and felt uncomfortable about it because you see yourself as scrupulously honest, then you have likely experienced cognitive dissonance. It occurs when one's ideas, beliefs, or behaviors are contradictory. When a person learns new information that challenges a deeply held belief, for example, or acts in a way that seems to undercut her self-image, the theory of cognitive dissonance explains the lengths to which people sometimes go to account for thoughts, words, and behaviors that seems to clash. But in fact, by bringing attention to the inconsistencies in our minds, cognitive dissonance can be an opportunity for growth. Exactly how we choose to resolve the dissonance and its accompanying discomfort can be a reflection of our mental health. So again, cognitive dissonance is contradictory behavior. Another behavior I want to add to this is called Stockholm Syndrome. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary says Stockholm Syndrome is the psychological tendency of a hostage to bond with, identify with, or sympathize with his or her captor. So does Christianity and Catholicism and other religious belief systems promote these contradictory behaviors? Absolutely. How many rape victims within the church were told to love the perpetrator? How many congregations were told to love their pastor despite his infidelities and out-of-wedlock babies he fathered? As a people, how many times we've been taught to love the people who actually enslaved us, who raped our men, who raped our women, who used our children for alligator bait? How many times have we been told to get over it? These behaviors are due to the poor understanding of Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 and 44. It says, "Ye have heard that it had been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you." What did the Hebrew Israelite Messiah mean when he commanded his disciples to love their enemies? The Hebrew Israelite Messiah was teaching from Exodus chapter 23, verse 4 and 5. It reads, "If thou meet thy enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. If thou see the donkey of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him." The Hebrew definition of the transliterated word enemy is pronounced ayab, which means to hate. In other words, as one of an opposite tribe or party. See, when the Hebrew Israelite Messiah says, "Love your enemy," he was simply saying, love those that are in the opposite tribes. They are still your brother. This is referring to the other tribes within the Israelites community. This was not referring to any of the nations such as the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Greeks, the Romans that held them in captivity. If you understand the tabernacle and the position of the Israelites, each tribe lived in a certain section around the tabernacle, the tabernacle, the tabernacle, the tabernacle.
And so far, I don't know anyone that got there and actually read the pews and said it means A, B, C, and D. And actually, I believe, if I'm correct, you could correct me if I'm wrong, the church actually changed their stance.
Yes.
I remember seeing, like I said, I remember seeing a few weeks back, Garfield hit me, another brother Salter on Sinetta TV, shout out to him, and he hit me. And he brought out some interesting points saying the same thing. Some people can muddy the waters when they get out here and they'll start promoting themselves as a professional in a specific field, and because they want to promote their agenda so bad, not saying that they're doing it intentionally attempting to mislead the people, but that they want to really promote something so bad.
Oh yes, I'm sorry, Shonda asked about my faith, I believe.
Okay, yeah. Somebody wrote McCarroll. Yes, I'm sorry, Sister. Yeah.
Oh, so yes, I am a Roman Catholic. Yes. I am a Roman Catholic.
Wait, that don't sound right. Just wait 1 second. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. That don't sound right.
Now, for all of you raw niggers that don't know, my name is John Tibbets, William Ford's chief carpenter. You will refer to me as master. Now, Mr. Chapin is the overseer on this plantation. You two will refer to him as master. So clap your hands. Like this. Come on. Come on now. Clap your hands. Nigger run, nigger flew, nigger tore his shirt in two. Run, run, a patty roller get you. Run, nigger, run, well, you better get away. You better get away. You better get away. You better get away.
Vocab Malone, and I am with my man today, Jay the producer. Jay the producer. Oh, I got another idea. Brother Jay, have you ever sang parodies before? You know, a parody, like a satire song?
Have I ever sung one?
Yeah, a parody.
No, I've never sung a parody, man.
I'm not gonna put you on the spot right now, but check it out. I wrote a parody to something, bro. I think that this thing's hilarious. I'm gonna see if you're down to do it, and I'm gonna make a video out of this joint. You know that song by Miley Cyrus, "Party in the USA"?
Yeah.
Yo, slavery in the USA, bro.
Oh man.
I got a whole song, man, and I can't sing it.
Talk about that one off
All right.
In boxing, the most dangerous punch is the punch you don't see. Why did I choose not to accept the challenge to debate John Mark Reiser in regards to the pews? Why did I tell him that I don't have to prove myself to him? Why is Abu, the Roman Catholic, so aggressive in his quest to debunk the pews in Savannah, Georgia? I want to answer the question as to why I refuse to debate John Mark Reiser, aka Vocab Alone, about the pews in Savannah, Georgia. Why I made it clear to him, Abu, and the rest of the urban apologetic community that I don't owe them an explanation. You don't just slap a person in the face and then turn around and ask that person what's wrong. I don't have to show them any receipts, permission slips, or a hall pass for that matter. Show me one video of these guys questioning the Jewish community as we know them with the same zeal that they direct towards our community. I will prove that the urban apologists operating under the spirit of the slave catcher. See, many of our brothers and sisters within Christianity and the conscious community are heavily influenced by this suppressive spirit. For example, show me the receipts. Where did this phrase originate? To answer the questions, I will start by reading the Slave Patroller's Oath that's posted on the lawenforcementmuseums.org. If you really want to address the police behaviors towards our community, it starts with understanding the culture of the slave catcher. As I read this oath, I will replace John Tibbetts' name from the movie clip you just saw to John Mark Reiser, aka Vocab Malone. I, Vocab Malone, do swear that I will, as searcher for guns, swords, and other weapons among the slaves in my district, faithfully and privately as I can, discharge the trust reposed in me as the law directs, to the best of my power. So help me God. I want to use another reference. I want to highlight another reference. It's called Slave Patrol Law and Violence in Virginia and Carolinas, written by Chelsea Hansen, page 12. It says, again, in this revised 1688 version of this slave law, the burden of capturing runaways was explicitly placed on all white men. In other words, all masters, overseers, and other persons whatsoever who were required to give wandering slaves with no tickets a sound whipping and detain them until the owner could retrieve them. As you see, again, no tickets, no receipts. Anyone from the Caucasian community had the power to ask that slave for their ticket or show his receipts, authorizing him to leave that plantation. If that slave did not have one, then the person asking had the authority to beat that slave, to punish that slave, to lock that slave up. It goes on to say, the law now mandated that bondsmen have passes when leaving their plantations, as it is absolutely necessary to the safety of this place. The historian Hilary Beckles has observed that in this sense, the entire white community functioned under the law as a collective police force. And this is what we're seeing in the urban apologetic community. This is the behavior. Page 6 says, Southern whites feared their slaves and needed mastery over them. The beginnings of a formal, organized, and public slave patrol system in the antebellum South can be traced to the private, informal, and sometimes voluntary efforts of Spanish and individual colonists in the New World had to experience difficulty controlling their slaves before the rest of the white community would intervene to help restrict slave behavior. Spaniards might entice English colonists, slaves, to freedom by giving bondsmen a safe haven as runaways or by encouraging them to act as fifth column forces during battle. See, fugitive bondsmen caused reoccurring trouble for Spanish and Portuguese settlers. By the 1520s, runaways already posed problems for Spanish authorities in colonial Mexico. Fugitives had to be hunted down lest they inspire others to flee. Page 11 says this: the historian Richard Dunn has written that overseers were expected to keep the Negro cabins under close surveillance, searching twice a month for stolen goods, clubs, and wooden swords. Unlike in the Spanish colonies, few indications suggest that white Barbadians used former bondsmen as slave catchers and the militia. The failure of privately paid slave catchers in the 1650s may have influenced the 1661 Slave Code, the first comprehensive law regulating slaves in Barbados. The new law shifted the job of the slave control firmly onto the shoulders of all whites, not just overseers. The preamble to the act for the better ordering of governing of Negroes reveals the motivating impulse behind the law's enactment. Slaves were a heathenish, brutish, and dangerous kind of people who had to be controlled. Their propensity to wander away from their master's plantation, either to run away deliberately or to steal goods and then resell them for personal gain, had long been the bane of Barbadian planters' lives. Constables and other white Barbadians shared responsibility for apprehending runaways who managed to flee their home. I want to highlight another reference as we tie this behavior of the slave catchers to the urban apologetic community. This is coming from African and African American Studies. Descriptive article, Early Modern History, 1492 through 1789. Economic History, Political History, World History, October 19, 2016. It says, this was not an easy task, but these Englishmen did have a number of Irish prisoners serving various sentences. They decided on a way for these Irish prisoners to work off their sentences on Barbados sugar plantations that sent thousands of indentured Irish prisoners to Barbados. Just this article alone completely debunks the Irish were slaves too. The argument that tends to surface during each presidential election cycle since President Obama was elected. Many would try to use these phrases to try to tell us that they were enslaved and they got over it, so we need to get over it too. These were Irish prisoners, not slaves. They were indentured servants. So it goes on to say, between 1627 and 1807, more than 400,000 Africans, mainly originating from West Africa, had been brought to Barbados as slaves to work on sugar plantations. The English planters would request to receive more slaves whenever they believed they needed more for the plantations. The Africans were viewed as nothing more than interchangeable machine parts in the process of sugar production. The treatment experienced by the Africans was among the most inhumane in human history. It goes on to say in Article 3, and it further enacts and ordained that if any Negro or other slaves under punishment by his master unfortunately shall suffer in life or member, which seldom happens, no person, whatsoever shall be liable to any fine thereof. This is the reason why John Mark Reiser, aka Vocab Malone, Abu, Eric Mason, Damon Richardson, and the rest of the entire community of the urban apologists do not have a remorseful bone in their body. John Mark Reiser, aka Vocab Malone, made it clear that he's not remorseful for offending anyone in our community with his racist parodies.
But what I do want to address, and why I want to come on here to address it again, is to say the same thing I said back then. I had the video on my channel, but I took it off. If anybody went on my channel, I took it off. I called the UPK radio station, and I did it as well on my channel. I gave a public apology to those in the Black Hebrew Israelite community, and even some Christians that were rubbed the wrong way with it. I was convicted about it only because of this reason, and this reason only why I don't do parodies now, is that when we're talking about being ministers, of the gospel, one of the principles that we're supposed to live by is to live to not give an offense, like as the apostle says, to the Jews, to the Greeks, neither to the church of God. At that time, that was something I did that, I was convicted about. I was in the movement. I knew the message was true, but how it came off was it messed a lot of people the wrong way. And so my main goal, being a former member of the movement, is to win brothers and sisters out of it to Christ. And if doing something like that, even if I say it was fun and games or whatever the case is, but if it's going to rub them the wrong way, then it's best I abstain from doing stuff like that. And so that's why I took it off my channel. That's why, I don't share it or anything like that. That's why I don't do parodies no more now, because of that type of thing. So I wanted to come on here. That's why I asked for the link. One, to give, re-say it again, but for those in the movement that was, or anybody in or out of the movement, if you was, offended by the parody video, I personally apologize for it. I did the singing on it.
How is you going against camel doctrine when you have a parody where you're pouring down camel pee, which of course is apple juice, down John McCrae's throat? Because it's a bad idea for people to drink camel pee. And so the parody is showing why Islam is bad. It's bad for the Black community. It's bad for every other type of community. And it's bad for your health, because drinking camel pee, despite what Muslim apologists say, is not a good thing. And the parody is showing that. And if you had your blinders off, you'd realize, hey, man, we shouldn't really want to have people drink camel pee. I'm glad this is there, because I didn't know that. Now, you said, well, you have people being blowed up and all this. Well, if you paid attention, we also have people, the main people that we deal with in the Boom Boom Room are white folks. We blow up. We have a KKK episode. We have all kinds of episodes. So it's not like we're going around and this is what's happening. Why did we have the Torah upside down though in the Hebrew Israelite episode, which was not my idea? It was my man Operation Apologetics idea, which I thought was a good idea.
Deuteronomy 28:37 says, "And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, a byword among all nations, whither Yahweh shall send thee." In other words, we will become the butt end of a joke. We will become the butt end of songs that will be sang about us, mocking us, as we see displayed by the urban apologists. So the last point I want to make is the origins of the song you heard in the movie clip titled "Run N-Word Run." This is the song the slave catchers sang as they searched out to hunt our people. Here's an updated remix of this song.
Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? What you gonna do?
I myself am not any sort of expert in any subject. I myself am an amateur, so it's not my place to try to exclude anyone else. But I do feel that irrespective of a person's status, it's better to focus on the argument and not on the person.
Wait, that don't sound right. Just wait 1 second. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. That don't sound right. That don't sound right.
If this was not a personal attack on me, why did he feel the need to include me in his discussion about the pews.
Recently, someone asked me if I was familiar with Pastor Kelly Richardson, and I was also told that he has a video on the subject of the claim that there's Hebrew cursive in the pews of the First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. And that's a subject that I'm interested in. I wrote a tiny bit on it in Vocab Malone's forum on Facebook. I found this video here titled Exposed, the Erasing History.
Here's one of the pews.
Greetings. So last night, a number of people drew my attention to a Facebook post by Benaiah Israel in which he attempted to treat one of the pews at First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia, as having Hebrew, specifically Hebrew in the Solitreo script. In his post, he was also kind enough to transcribe precisely what he felt was there, and he even offered a translation. Now, I want to say up front that I really appreciate Benaiah's efforts here, as he's the first person I personally know of who has attempted to actually look at the markings and make a case for Hebrew. In this video, I will be expressing some doubt about his conclusions, but I want to be clear that this video is intended to neither disrespect him nor dissuade him from his search. I actually hope the gentleman and others around him continue to participate in these public exercises in which they explore different possible ideas regarding the markings in those pews. Oh, and by the way, worthy of note, those excited by Benaiah's post seem to include Dante Fortson, who shared it and then proceeded to draw Brother Berean's attention to it with a tag, presumably because Brother Berean had recently had me on his show to discuss the pews. So too, it was praised by Yacoba, who, if I'm not mistaken, is part of the End of the World Ministries. I'm not sure either of these gentlemen noticed the issues with the post.
I hope you notice a pattern here with Abu. Notice how he states that someone asked him if he was familiar with Pastor Kelly Richardson, and how he was also told that I have a video of the subject, there's Hebrew cursive in the pews of the First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. In the second video he did, titled A Response to Benaiah Israel, Georgia Pews in Solitreo, he says, last night a number of people drew my attention to a Facebook post by Benaiah Israel. In the process of that video, Abu felt the need to mention Dante Fortson and Yacoba as he cast doubts on Benaiah's work. That is not a coincidence. That is not done by accident. If you're wondering why Abu and Vocab Malone sound exactly the same, is because Abu is was a mentor of Vocab Malone. His goal is to do what is called in the political arena swift boating. This action is a tactic used to completely smear the opposition with blatant lies and attempt to discredit that person. Should we be surprised by his actions? Should we be surprised by his tactics? What's sad is how our brothers and sisters continue to give this person room to further divide our people. This is why I am very disappointed with Brother Berean. I'm very disappointed with the conscious community, as well as others. Abu says that he is a Roman Catholic, and so I need to shed light on the phrase crafty counsel. Why I chose this title. The 83rd book of Psalms, verse 1 through 5 says this: Keep not thou silence, O Elohim. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O Elohim. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, in other words, a war cry, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate. They are an alliance. They are constitution. They are asiento, against thee. The key here is the word name. Name in Hebrew means reputation, glory, character. And so they, in other words, this confederate, made it a point to come against the hidden ones, to erase the reputation, to erase also the literal name that's associated with the Most High's chosen people. And guess what? We are the hidden ones. I want to turn your attention to Slavery and the Catholic Church, page 52 and 53. It says, Papa grants to the kings of Portugal, giving authority to enslave the Saracens and other non-Christians of West Africa with whom Christendom is at war. 1452 through 1514. Where you see that word Christendom, that is synonymous to Catholic. Notice it says that Christendom is at war. Unfortunately, we have been so dumbed down to referring to this tragic event, this block of history, as a slave trade, when actually it was and continued to be a world war. Some of you are waiting for World War III. World War III already came and gone. So again, the transatlantic slave trade, the proper term should be the transatlantic world war. In 1442, a Portuguese captain brought to the Gold Coast some Moorish prisoners of war, exchanged them for 10 Negro slaves, and brought these back to Lisbon. A trading settlement was established in Lagos by 1444. It would appear that by 1452, the Portuguese were anxious to establish their property rights over their newly discovered West African territories. And so Pope Nicholas V was approached and was apparently led to believe that these territories of the Guinea coast were inhabited by Saracens and other enemies of Christendom. There is no explanation of a series of papal documents which applied the well-known contemporary rules of war. Let me say that again, which applied the well-known contemporary rules of war to the situation in West Africa, whereas the Portuguese were well aware the local Negro inhabitants were not Saracens, in other words, Turks, or people practicing Islam, were not Muslims, and were not the enemies of Christendom. And notice it highlights Pope Nicholas V, which he is a saint now. So his actual name is Saint Nicholas. Is it a coincidence that our people are struggling with the worship of Saint Nicholas? Let me turn your attention to another article. Hebrew inscription on a 3,000-year-old jar could redraw borders of ancient Israel. It reads, the Dead Sea Scroll gave experts a clearer view of the text, enabling them to decipher the 5-letter word written in ancient Hebrew. Yahalom Mack says, the inscription reads, Le Benayu, which simply means that the storage jar and its contents belong to Benayu. Why am I bringing this up? I'm going to answer that question. Let's break down Le Benayu. Let's break it down. Let's start with the Lamad or Lamed. It means 2, 4. And now let's deal with Bana. Bana, what does that mean? To build, obtain children, make, repair, set up. And a key word is establish. So Bana in Hebrew means to build, repair, establish. And now let's deal with the Hebrew definition of Yah, which is the contracted form of Yahweh. But let's go to it for the sake of the presentation. meaning the same, Jah, the sacred name, Jah, the Lord. So let's bring this all together. So again, Yah is the contracted name of Yahweh. Now let's allow the voices of our ancestors speak. Let's go to the slave database. You will find this name Bar Ban Yah. See, this name means build, repair, make stable your son Yah. Understanding this is one of the witnesses I use to confirm our people's language, as well as understanding that our people were speaking not just Arabic, they were speaking an ancient Hebrew language, because Bar is not an Arabic word. Bar means son in Aramaic. So Bar Banya means build, repair, make stable your son Yah. And with that being said, this is a perfect introduction to bring on Benai Yah Israel as he take us into round 3 as he explains the Spanish Inquisition.
What do they say, fam, about the so-called black man? If you want to hide something from a black man, what do? You put it in the book. Well, I'm here to tell you that today the books are open. Hallelujah. Now, let's begin. Our journey begins in the city of Jerusalem, when King Nebuchadnezzar conquers Jerusalem, destroys the temple, and takes the nobles, the smiths, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem captive in roughly 592 to 597 BC. King Nebuchadnezzar took some of those captives to a place we currently call Spain and Portugal. And the following reference reads, the Spanish Jews maintained that they had been transmitted hither after the destruction of the temple by the Babylonian conqueror Nebuchadnezzar. Certain Jewish families, the Ibn Dawids and the Abarbanels, boasted descent from the royal house of Dawid and maintained that their ancestors had been settled since the time immemorial, partly in the district of Lucena and partly in the environs of Toledo and Seville. And it reads, the Lord also shall save the tents of Judah, affirms that at the desolation of the first temple, 2 families of the house of Dawid came and settled in Spain, one at Lucena and the other, the Abarbanels, at Seville. And from these came 1,000 offshoots. In this reference, we note the name Nasi is another name for Yahya, Negro, and that the Hebrew word Nasi means prince. That's Strong's 5387. That's Strong's 5387. And the reference reads, the numerous Spanish Jewish family of Nasi also traced back its pedigree to King David and proved it by means of a genealogical table and seals. The family of Ibn Abelias was more modest and dated its immigration only from the destruction of the Second Temple. A family tradition runs to the effect that the Roman governor of Spain begged the conqueror of Jerusalem to send him some noble families from the capital of Judea, and that Titus complied with the request. So to recap, family, King Nebuchadnezzar took the inhabitants of Jerusalem to Spain and Portugal, and the Roman general Titus took the nobles to Spain and Portugal. And this is where Israel's dispersion around the world begins. In the year 1492, the children of Israel living in Spain and Portugal were expelled by way of an expulsion edict or decree. They were told to convert to Christianity or die. And it reads, Ferdinand and Isabel, by law, drove the Jews out of Spain. It's important to note that this decree impacted hundreds of thousands of Jews. Old references estimate the numbers upwards of 800,000 brews. Newer references attempt to downplay the numbers. In any event, some brews chose to become Christians and stayed in Spain. However, hundreds of thousands fled Spain. Some fled directly into Africa, while most fled into Portugal. And it reads, the Jews thus driven from Spain fled for the most part into Portugal. It is important to note that these Spanish and Portuguese brews were black. Many references refer to these Jews as brown, black, very brown, and swarthy. Here are just a few references describing these Jews expelled in 1492. And it reads, thus they are fair in Britain and Germany, brown in France and in Turkey, swarthy in Portugal and Spain. And it reads, the English Jew is white, and the Armenian olive, the Arabian copper, the Portuguese swarthy. And the next reference reads, in France and Turkey, they are brown. In Spain and Portugal, their color is swarthy. And the next reference reads, 'tis also a vulgar error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese Jews, who, marrying always among one another, beget children like themselves, and subsequently the swarthiness or the blackness of their complexion is entailed upon their whole race. And just in case you're wondering what the word swarthy means, swarthy is of being a dark hue or dusty complexion, and this is a dictionary entry from an old dictionary. And you can see it also gives you an example of how to use the word swarthy. It says black, as the swarthy African. So Africans were associated or called swarthy. And also the brews were referred to as very black or very dark, especially in Spain and Portugal, as the following reference reads, and it reads, a tall, thin, very black man, like a Spaniard or a Jew, about 50 years old. So one important note, Spanish and Portuguese Jews weren't just brown colored. They were dark brown, close to black. In fact, they were blacker than some Africans. And when they mixed with the Africans to produce mulattoes, some of the first generation descendants were darker than the Africans. As the following reference reads, and it reads, the Portuguese who planted themselves on the coast of Africa a few centuries ago have been succeeded by descendants blacker than many Africans. Now, this anonymous painting depicts life in Lisbon, Portugal in the 1500s. During this time, the Jews who embraced Christianity were forced to wear a red cross on their upper garment. Now, in this painting, you can see a gentleman on the bottom right riding a horse wearing a red cross of the converted Jews. And notice his skin color is close to black. Now, another description of these Spanish and Portuguese brews involves their skull. When viewing the skulls of medieval Spanish and Portuguese brews, they were identified as dolichocephalic, which is the skull of the present day Negro. The skulls of the Ashkenazi, on the other hand, are not dolichocephalic. Now, let's read a little bit about the skull of the Negro, and it reads, the Negroid type is primarily represented by the Negro of Africa between Sahara and the Cape District, including Madagascar. The skin varies from dark brown to brown black, with eyes of similar dark hue and hair usually black and always crisp or woolly. The skull is narrow, dolichocephalic. And this next reference, it says dolichocephalic with dark skin and woolly hair. All right. Now let's read from this reference here. You can see it on the screen. And it says, on the other hand, those of Africa and Syria have a purely dolichocephalic type of head. And now let's read the Journal of Science, which also confirms that the Spanish and Portuguese skulls are dolichocephalic as well, which is the same skull as the Negro. And it reads, the same variability occurs in other finds, but the skulls of most of the Sephardim, or Spanish and Portuguese Jews,
are dolichocephalic, which is the skull of the Negro.
All right, so hopefully you can see that not only the skull type of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews matched the skull of the Negroes, also the color matched the color of the Negroes. But all right, let's get back to Judah, who was taken into captivity from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and by General Titus of Rome into Spain and Portugal. And from there, Spain expelled the Brews, who would not conform to Christianity. Now, some Brews fled into Africa and many fled into Portugal. And now we see Portugal send some of these Brews to West Africa, to the exact same places that the transatlantic slave trade would start from less than 10 years later. Now let's read a little bit of that. And it reads, King John II in 1492 expelled all the Brews, or the Jews, to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the black Portuguese, as they are called, so they were actually called black Portuguese, having skulls of Negroes and having the skin color of Negroes, they were called black Portuguese. And it says, as they are called, and the Jews of Luango, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descendants. So it says they're descended from the very Negroes, is what that's saying. All right, let's keep reading. Now, I should note that as some Brews fled Spain into Portugal, there was a group of elites, or of nobles, that paid the king of Portugal to dwell there in safety for a period of time. In other words, the Brews remaining in Portugal and Spain after the expulsion edicts were forced Christian converts called New Christians. Now, this is when the church continues its open persecution of the children of Israel. However, this time they're persecuting the children of Israel who converted to Christianity. Now, to do this, Portugal and Spain started an institution called the Inquisition. The Inquisition was started with the sole purpose of persecuting the former Jews. In fact, the petition to the Pope to start the Inquisition mentions the Jews by name. Now, King John III is credited for starting the Inquisition in Portugal and using it to expel many of the Christian Jews to Africa and the Americas. This is where the children of Judah's journey to Savannah, Georgia begins. The Inquisition banished large numbers of Brews to Brazil. And it reads, in the year 1548, the Jews in Portugal were persecuted by some Catholics called inquisitors, and many of them were consequently banished to Brazil. And the next reference reads, in 1548, the Jews, many of whom had taken refuge in Portugal, were persecuted by the Inquisition and banished to Brazil. Now, it's from Brazil a large group of Spanish and Portuguese Jews would make their way to Savannah, Georgia, by way of Barbados. However, before discussing this group, let's first discuss another group of Spanish and Portuguese Jews who escaped up into England. Now, some Brews evaded the Inquisition and found refuge in England. And it reads, meanwhile, the Jewish population of London had been continually increasing. Many causes contributed to the influx. Poverty, political troubles, religious persecutions, outbreaks of war, all acted as accessories to the immigration. The quarrels between the emperor and the Turks, the occupation and the recapture of Belgrade caused a temporary inflow towards England from that direction. The renewal of the Inquisition activities in Portugal served to increase the Sephardi, or the Spanish and Portuguese Jew, population of London. All right, so to recap, we're tracking two groups of Spanish and Portuguese Brews as they leave Spain and Portugal. One group gets captured by the Inquisition and gets placed in South Central America, mainly Brazil, while another flees from the Inquisition and begins to amass in England. It's during this time that England has colonies in what we would call today the United States. There were two states which offered the Brews a place of refuge by a charter of tolerance. In other words, there were two states that would allow the Brews to live there without religious persecution. It was the state of Georgia and the state of South Carolina. So in Georgia, there was one city these Spanish and Portuguese Brews converged on, the city of Savannah, Georgia. On the day, the 7th of July, 1733, that Oglethorpe had assembled the colonists on the site of the present city of Savannah, for the purpose of allotting to each settler his proportion of land and of organizing a municipal government. A vessel directly from London came up the Savannah River whilst the colonists were partaking of a public dinner given at the close of the day's proceedings, and landed 40 Jewish immigrants. And the next reference reads, in July 1733, 40 Israelites arrived in Savannah. The gentlemen in England who were responsible for sending Jews to Georgia acted from purely charitable motives with the avowed object of accomplishing the result which the London congregation desired to accomplish. Subsequent events too show that the settlers sent by them were entirely unexceptional. Under the rules of the trustees, nearly all being under 30 years of age, able-bodied and industrious. You see, family, there were so many Spanish and Portuguese Brews arriving in Savannah that they made up 1/3 of the total population of Savannah, Georgia. Let me say that again. They made up 1/3 of the total population in Savannah, Georgia. There were so many of them, in fact, they had to rent a house for their assembly. Now, this meeting place was on Market Square in the city of Savannah, and it's important to note that this meeting place of the Spanish and Portuguese Brews is on the same street as the First African Baptist Church, and it's roughly 3 to 4 blocks down the street. But let's go ahead and read this reference, and it reads, previous to their departure, articles used in the ceremonial service of the synagogue were presented to them by a friend in London. And one of their first acts after their arrival was to establish a synagogue, constituting as they did nearly 1/3 of the actual settlers. They had a large congregation, and accordingly, they rented a house on Market Square in Savannah for their synagogue, to which they gave the name Mikveh, or Assemblage of Israel, and where religious services were regularly held for some years. Now, when the Spanish and Portuguese Brews lived in Savannah, they lived in an area on the west side of the city, the same neighborhood of the First African Baptist Church. Now, also keep in mind that some Brews would leave a few years later during the English and Spanish War, only to return a few years later in large numbers. But this is when they were leaving during that time. It reads, this, however, is followed by another entry which shows that the majority of Jews had left Savannah and they had left to go to Charleston, South Carolina. In July 1741, the journal recites, on the west side of Savannah lies the township lots of the Jews, all gone to the other colonies except for 3 or 4. All right. Now, this is another reference which shows the meeting place, or the location of the meeting place of the Spanish and Portuguese Brews. And it reads, it says, at an unknown date, a house was rented on Market, now Ellis Square, and was altered for regular congregational services, but the small congregation faced internal problems. So this reference tells us that the location was on what was called Ellis Square. So some references will just say it's on Market,
and some references will say it's on Ellis Square.
And here's just another reference from the New Georgia Encyclopedia, just showing us where the meeting place or the assembly location was located. And like the other references, it says the congregation rented a house on Market Square, later Ellis Square. All right, so now we know where these Spanish and Portuguese brews were congregating. If you look at the map on the screen, this is a map of Savannah, Georgia. And what's circled on your screen is the location of the first African Baptist church. And this is the area, the next area you see on your screen is the area of Market Square, right? Some references will say Market Square extends from Franklin Square all the way down to Ellis Square on your right-hand side. But here, just to be safe, I circled the location of Ellis Square as the location of the meeting place of the Spanish and Portuguese brews. But as you can see, these locations are extremely close to each other. They were in the same neighborhood, right? So basically, the first African Baptist church and the location of the Spanish and Portuguese brews were in the same neighborhood. And also this highlighted area in green, remember, we read a reference which said that the brews were required, or they lived in a township on the west side of Savannah. So what's highlighted on your screen is the west side of Savannah. So you can see that the first African Baptist church is squarely within this area that the Spanish and Portuguese Jews lived in. Let's continue reading, family, and it reads, far from being newcomers, Jews are found in smaller or greater numbers in all of the 13 original colonies in the early days of colonial settlement. In some, like New York and Rhode Island, they appear in considerable numbers long before the close of the 17th century. And Yah willing, we'll get to this in another video. But it says in Georgia, they were among the earliest settlers. And it is therefore not unreasonable to expect to find Jewish settlers even in the early days of the Old Dominion. It is a curious fact that though the neighboring colonies of South Carolina and Georgia possessed a fair-sized Jewish community long before the Revolutionary War. So I want to stop here and just let you know that before the Revolutionary War, they had a fair size. And of course, we talked about during the Spanish War, there are many brews that left Georgia, went up to South Carolina. But what you'll find in some of the subsequent references that even after the Revolutionary War, when they returned, that there was a large number of brews that returned back to Savannah, Georgia. All right. So let's continue reading here. It says, the Jew, through the centuries of environment, is accustomed to the city rather than the country. So I just want to pause here just to let you know that the brews were used to living in the city, that their place of dwelling of these Negroid people with dark skin, right, lived in the city. And if you look up the word ghetto in the Webster Dictionary, it says ghetto, a quarter or a part of the city in which the Jews were formerly required to live. So who lives in ghettos in the cities today is a question. But let's go back to our reference, and it says the Jew, through centuries of environment, is accustomed to the city rather than the country. And this is possibly the reason why Charleston in South Carolina and even Savannah in the more recently settled colony of Georgia contained a considerable number of Jews at the outbreak of the War for Independence. All right. So just wanted to show you that there were a large number of brews in Savannah. Just want to drive that point home, and also show you that they preferred to live in the city, right? Live in the city. All right. So to recap, at one time, 1/3 of the population of Savannah was composed of brews. These brews lived on the west side of the city, in the same neighborhood as the first African Baptist church. Not only did they live in the same neighborhood, they were meeting at a meeting place that was on the same street of the church, 4 blocks away. Now, these Spanish and Portuguese brews came from London as well as South America. All right. And in this reference, I just want to show you that some of these brews, that they not only came from London, but they also came from South America. So let's read. It says, some of the Jewish settlers who came to Georgia within a year or two after the original settlement appear to have come from, or at any rate to have been, in South America. All right. So now we can see that South America, that the Inquisition Jews that were placed in South America were also coming to Savannah, Georgia. But let's see, I want to also use this reference to show you what the Jews did in the state of Georgia, because at this time, slavery in Georgia was outlawed, so it was not permitted. So they needed somebody to do the work. So let's read. It says, Mr. Oglethorpe had divided the colonists into parties. One cut forks, poles, lathes for building the bowers. Another set them up. A third fetched palmetto leaves. A fourth thatched, and a Jew workman, bred in Brazil, and had come from Savannah, taught them to do this nimbly in a neat manner. All right, so you can see that the Jew was a workman. He was bred, right? And there's another story behind that word bred in Brazil, but we'll leave that for another day. And the following reference reads, and it reads, immediately after the close of the revolution, many Israelites arrived in Savannah. All right, so I'm just going to pause here for a moment, family, just to point out that in previous references, we were reading references that show the Israelites before the Revolutionary War. And we also read that some of the Israelites left Georgia and went up to Charleston, South Carolina. But this reference focuses after the Revolutionary War, just to show you that they did indeed return, where it says immediately after the close of the revolution, many Israelites arrived in Savannah and made it their place of residence. All right. So family, we now know that the Brews were in Savannah, Georgia in large numbers. And in fact, that at one point they made up 1/3 of the population, and that they lived in and around the first African Baptist church. And we can assume that they brought their language with them from their native land of Spain and Portugal. And so you may wonder, all right, so what does any of this have to do with the first African Baptist church? After all, it has African in the name. It doesn't have anything to do with Israelites living in or around them. Or in other words, they're totally separate and isolated and distinct from these Spanish and Portuguese Brews. Well, let's see if that's correct. Let's read about the history of the church, and let's see if it has anything to do with the Israelites living in their neighborhood. And so let's start by taking a look at the pastor of the first African Baptist church. I wonder what they called their spiritual leader, their pastor. So the pastor of this church, what was his title? Let's take a closer look at the former pastor of the first African Baptist church, named Andrew C. Marshall. Does he have anything to do with Israel? All right, so you can see the reference on your screen where it says the history of the first African Baptist church. So that was the name of the church, right? And Andrew C. Marshall was born a slave. He has traveled over a great part of the United States. He has by industry succeeded in purchasing himself and done many benevolent acts among his color, and has given to different institutions several $1,000s. The venerable father in Israel, Andrew C. Marshall. Wait, hang on a second. Let's read that again, family. I thought I heard Israel, and it says, he has by industry succeeded in purchasing himself and done many benevolent acts among his color, and has given to different institutions several $1,000s. The venerable father in Israel, Andrew C. Marshall, died in Richmond, Virginia, December 7th, 1856, while returning from the north to the people of his charge. Okay, family. In this reference of the history of the first African Baptist church, we see the pastor was called the venerable father in Israel. You know what? Maybe that's a typo. So let's keep reading. Let's go down a little bit further in the book and see if we can find some other pastors that were called by this name. All right. So let's read a little bit. Let's go a little bit further. Now, this reference speaks about the very founder, the very first pastor of the church. So let's see what they called the very first pastor, the founder of the first African Baptist church. And the reference reads, and it reads, "It is very befitting, therefore, that we should welcome you, our church was planted in blood. Reverend Andrew Bryan, its founding and first pastor, was whipped until his flesh was terribly torn. His blood ran freely and puddled by his lacerated body on the ground, for no other crime than that he preached Jesus to Africa's sable sons and daughters enslaved in this country. When he was commanded not to preach the gospel, he raised his dusky hand, stained in his own blood, drawn by his vile persecutors, and said with a trembling voice, with that manly heroism and Christian courage that the grace of God alone can fan into a burning eloquence, "If you would stop me from preaching, cut off my head." This humble statement from our Father in Israel. I'm gonna pause right here, family, because you see where it says from our Father in Israel, and using the word our, it implies both the pastor and the congregation considered themselves Israel. But you know what? Let's not stop there, family. Let's get some more additional information about the church. We see when they were living, they considered themselves Israel. But what about in death? When they died, did they also regard themselves as Israel? So let's take a look at a commemorative plaque in the church honoring the former pastor. Let's see if the plaque mentions Israel. And it reads, born in Marion, Alabama, July 27th, 1850, died Savannah, Georgia, April 24th, 1900, age 49 years. Pastor, First African Baptist Church, 14 years and 6 months. A prince and a great man, fallen this day in Israel. 2 Samuel 3:38. Okay, family, let's review what we've learned so far. So we learned that many Spanish and Portuguese brews came to Savannah, Georgia. We learned that the brews made up at one point 1/3 of the population. We learned that they lived on the west side of Savannah in the same neighborhood as the First Baptist Church. We learned that they met on the same street as the church, about 3 to 4 blocks away. We learned that the founding pastor was referred to as Israel, as well as the congregation. We learned that another pastor in the church was referred to as the Venerable Father in Israel. We also learned that the church commemorated a deceased pastor by associating him with Israel. And as you can see, we haven't even reviewed the Hebrew on the pews yet. Family, at this point, hopefully you can see that this church, this Sunday church, this First African Baptist Church, didn't have any issues whatsoever referring to themselves as Israel. And it makes you wonder what happened to the churches today. That unlike the early church, they seem to have a problem recognizing themselves as Yisrael. Perhaps the churches today need to go back to the beginning. Go back to where it all started in Savannah, Georgia, where the pastor was whipped for preaching the Messiah, then turned around and was referred to as Yisrael. There's a lesson to be had for the so-called African Americans today. However, I digress. But wait, there's more. Let's discuss the Hebrew written on the pews of the church. Pews of the church. Pews of the church. Pews of the church. Pews of the church.